Hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome. I hope you're all impressed that I've made it here today and not postponed because I am absolutely frazzled. What a first week back. I've been all over the place, driving around, delivering training in person. My voice is a bit croaky and deep, but I'm going to keep going. So I've thrown together some slides quite quickly, but you all know that I can talk about things for time immemorial anyway. I will upload into the Crowdcast chat box the slides. So if you would like to use the slides for this session to deliver some in-house training yourselves, you're very welcome to, or you could just share the slides and read them. I will also upload into the Crowdcast chat box immediately after the session a couple of documents that I refer to. So come back to it later to get those, or if you're watching on record, they should be in the chat box for you. I hope you're all well, by the way. This session is going to be all about target practice reading books and just a little bit of clarity about how they can be used. Before we get started, I'm going to answer the question that was already put in the chat. So thank you to Catherine for answering this. I just don't want to forget about it and leave it till later. And I don't actually address this in the session, so it's good to address it. So Catherine has asked about using reading books for sort of in-class teaching when you get to year 2 or beyond, when you use Next Steps, Rocket Phonics Next Steps. So in Rocket Phonics Next Steps, there are books allocated and recommended for each week of teaching, but they don't directly link in to the phonics sounds in the way that the target practice books do that we're going to talk about. So she's asking, do they have to have a book linked to the sound of the week? For example, starting on turquoise this week with the A sound, if they could read a purple book fluently with understanding. Nope, absolutely not. And one of the takeaways from this session that I hope you get is a bit of empowerment, actually, that we as a scheme, we give loads of support and structure, but we don't dictate. We really try to encourage. It's about you knowing your children, and it's about you choosing which books are right for them at this particular time. So in Next Steps, the books are allocated according to colour to keep children progressing through the colour bands. We know that during year 2, we really need to get them from turquoise or orange that might be coming out. We really need to get them up to white, ready to go on to lime when they go into year 3 to be on a really good trajectory. But of course, all children are different. Some are reading lower than that, some are reading higher than that. So it's just a guide. And so you absolutely can allocate, for example, saying here, a purple book. Yep, no problem. And also in year 2, if you're using Next Steps, because it does revise and follow the letter sounds, the book in the planning might suggest like a turquoise or a purple, but you actually might choose a lower level target practice reader because it links directly with the A sound, for example. So that's fine too. So I hope that answers your question, Catherine. No, they don't have to have a book linked. You can allocate a book according to what's right for your children. So let me find my slides somewhere on my desktop. Here we go. Share this window. Excellent. There we go. Slides are coming up. Okay, perfect. So you should be able to see my slides. You should be able to hear me. If you can't, let me know, put something into chat. I have got the chat box open on the screen with me so that I can see if anybody asks any questions throughout. You can add questions later on if you come back to this, and occasionally I come back to the webinars, I check if has anybody asked any questions, or there'll be an email address at the end. You can email in if I've not addressed something that you wanted to know. So this session is making the most of target practice readers. Our plan, the things we're going to think about are, what are target practice readers? When should we use them? And I mean, logistically, organisation, should we be using them for guided reading, shared reading, every day, every week, book bag reading? Like, when do we use these books? And how should we use them? So when we are going to use them, how are they intended to be used? The spoiler, because I'm not one of those people that likes to deliver a whole session and keep you hanging on to the end to find out the crux of the message. The spoiler alert is there is no one correct way to use target practice reading books. And actually, probably this is why some people ask the question, how do we use them? Can you give us a bit more support? Because we aren't prescriptive about it. We put them in there, we put the structure in there, and then we say, it's up to you. You've got to work it out. So you need to figure out what works well for your school. And my experience of visiting so many different schools and working with loads of people is different structures for allocating books and using books works differently in different schools. And yes, there sometimes are trends or fads or different ways of doing things, and I'll talk about that. But it's about owning it. And if you're thinking about Ofsted, what are Ofsted looking for? Ofsted don't have a particular style of using the books they're looking for. They're just looking for, have you thought about and carefully allocated and matched books with readers? The big, strong message that's in the reading framework is that we don't give our children things to read that they can't read because we haven't taught them any of the letters or sounds in that book. So it's beyond them, it's impossible, causes low self-esteem, etc. So different schools do use target practice reading books in different ways. And if you're a member of the Reading Planet Rocket Phonics teacher group on Facebook, you can put a message in there, and we can give people a nudge to answer you if people aren't very chatty and forthcoming. But there are people in there that I know use books in different ways. So we can give them a nudge to give you some direct support on what they're doing in their school. So the key is understanding how the books were intended to be used, what we had in our minds when we developed them, the possibilities of how they can be used, and then look at what's going to work most effectively for you and your setting. But very simply, the more reading practice you can fit in, the better. That's all everybody's trying to do, is trying to look at the logistics of timetables and the way that we teach, and how can we squeeze in more reading opportunities for our children. And of course, the more reading that we do with them, the faster the progress is going to be. So that's what everybody has got the intention for. DFE, Ofsted, different programs, everybody. So what are target practice reading books? I often call them TPRs for short, target practice readers. They are books that focus on small groups of target letter sounds, and they're cumulative. So each book builds upon the previous book and adds a couple more letter sounds so that you've got a little bit more scope as you move through them. So they're cumulatively progressive, focus on these small groups, fully decodable alongside the program, and really closely aligned and tied in with the progression of Rocket Phonics teaching. So as you're teaching Rocket Phonics following the planning, the books are tied in for you as to when they become decodable. Target letter sounds are listed on the back cover and on the inside front cover, and that makes it nice and straightforward for organising things in book boxes. I do know that, and we always move on quite quickly in education with these things, but certainly a couple of years ago, one of the Ofsted questions that was cropping up in schools is, how do you make sure that all your reading books in their boxes aren't all getting muddled up with each other? And so, for example, if you had a new teaching assistant, maybe someone who's less experienced and they're sort of new to it, how are you making sure that they're putting the books in the right boxes? Or if children are selecting a book from a box, you said, oh, go to the pink box and choose your next book. Have they got a system where they can look at those letter sounds and they can see, oh yeah, this is the one that I should be reading, or this is in the wrong box because these sounds are nowhere near this? So we still use some color coding. We still use that sort of banding system, but it's a modern version of the banding system because we have the same sort of grammar inclusions, language structures, punctuation features, character development, plot development as book banding and leveling always has had. But now we have, rather than repetitive text as such, we have phonics allocation. So it aligns with the phonics. So it's flagged up really, really clearly on the back of the book. These are the letter sounds that are focused on in this book, and also in the inside front cover as well. Every week on the planning, it is flagged up for you from week 3. So starting in reception, week 3. Before that, you haven't got kind of your sapping sounds enough to do much with. So from week 3 onwards, every single week on the plan, 1 or 2 books are flagged up to say, these books are now decodable. You can expect that children can access this content because you've taught everything that they need to know in these books by now. And when there are two books, you don't have to use both books. You've got choice. You might pick one of those books, or as we'll go on to discuss, you might be using the books in different ways. So it's just making you aware these are the books that are now decodable because you've taught two more sounds, so you've kind of unlocked the next ones. One school I've seen had quite a fun way of sort of presenting this with the learners. They bought some, I want to say like gold chests, like little boxes. They were gold chests. I can't remember where the teacher got them from, but they were really awesome, these gold chests. And she would put the next week's books in the gold chest, and they would literally unlock the gold chest to reveal, oh, guys, we've learned some more phonics, and these are the next books that are now unlocked from this chest for us to read. And that was quite a nice way of high profiling them, a bit of fun. Now, in the Facebook group, which there's a link here, so when you get the slides, you can have the link, or you can note down the name of the group, or you can search Reading Planet Rocket Phonics Teacher Group. If you're not in that group, it's worth being in that group if you're a Facebook user. But in there, and in the Crowdcast webinar chat box after I finish talking, are going to be uploaded some useful lists showing these target practice readers. So in the Facebook group, they're already there. In the chat box, I'll put them there shortly. But there are a couple of useful lists putting all of these target practice readers together and sort of showing them. So this is one of the ones that we put in the group summer 2023, because we started off with 24 target practice readers and they were kind of paced out throughout the program, and then we were able to create another phase, so we were able to go in and create all of these in-between readers to really kind of make the provision very tight and very full. So the black copies are what we already had from the previous year, and then in 2023 we created the green ones, and you can see there the week of teaching, the colour band, the letter sound coverage in the class. So this is what you've just been teaching in class. And now here are the target practice readers that are decodable, align with that, and the letter sounds that are used. And you can see there is such a fine progression of, you've got your SatPin books, then you add on the next couple of sounds, then you add on the next couple of sounds, and you add on the next couple of, it's like a bit of a rolling program of introducing these new sounds. So there's a document like that that can be quite handy for you to see the overview. And then credit to a teacher in the group called Katie Amy, who uploaded this document, and she said, oh, you know, people might find this helpful. This is how in her school they use the readers. It might need updating. There might be new books that need putting in here by now. But in her school, they've listed everything in this way, and they use it as a bit of a tracker. So they tick off which books pupils have read. Some schools like to have a really tight hold over exactly which books each child has read. So whether you're doing some group teaching or individual reading, you have a list, and you literally tick off, this child has read Ants, now they've read The Pan, next they're going to read The Cog, next they're going to read It Is Not a Dot. Some schools do that. And in Katie Amy's school, they also supplement the practice with the regular Rocket Phonics readers, which contain bigger groups of sounds. So you can see here, underneath the first 4 target readers, there's the phonic readers they contain all of those first 12 letter sounds. So you need to have got to a little bit of a later point, like week 6, to be able to start reading those. So they supplement. So some schools keep a really tight tick list. Each child has read each book. Other schools are more relaxed and more flexible, and the reading record in book bags might be the record of what's been read, but you're not worrying about, did they read Ants, did they read The Pan, did they read The Cog? They might read Ants. They might then jump in their progression, you skip them on 3 or 4 books, and that's fine too. Both ways are absolutely fine of doing it. So because target practice readers tie in so tightly with the teaching of the phonics week by week, it makes them ideal for the direct application and consolidation of their developing phonic knowledge and reading skills. Makes sense, doesn't it? You teach it, you practice it, you revise it in your phonics lesson, and then here you go, you can directly apply this new phonics knowledge and these developing skills into a real little book. You know, you can see that sort of magic happen. So that's the kind of thought process behind them, is it gets children reading books sooner, more successfully, smoother, and you're developing all those skills alongside your phonics teaching. A little example of how some people use the target practice reading books. So in Rocket Phonics, you have alternate blending and segmenting days. You have 2 blending days a week. So in that blending lesson for your phonics lesson, you might do your revisit and review with flashcards. You teach your phonics using your big book story spread. The children practice their phonics skills using their pupil practice booklet, practice and a bit of application. And then you might immediately at the end of that session have your target practice reading books. Some schools have them on the table available. So when you've finished your pupil practice book, children, you all now need to reach for your target practice reading book. Some schools, if they are blessed with a bigger resource budget, might have copies per child or copies per pair. Some schools, if they perhaps have a smaller budget and don't have as many copies, you might have the target practice reading book available for that particular week, but also the books from the previous few weeks. You can have a selection of different titles that the children can all access because they're actually revising and practicing what you've taught them in previous weeks. So a box of books on the table for children to access, just to look through by themselves. So we're not even doing a structured form of one-to-one reading or group reading or shared reading. They're just reading the books and applying what they've been doing in their lesson afterwards. You can also have those target practice reading books available at the end of a segmenting lesson, because you can say for an extension task, okay, we've done our segmenting practice, you've done your pupil practice booklet practice for segmenting. Now your extension task is use your target reading practice book to find words in there, do like an activity linked to the spelling, find words that contain the letter sound you've been practicing with today, or copy some words, or copy out a sentence, or copy out a picture. I really encourage everybody to be more creative and more flexible with using target practice reading books, because they are such a useful resource for practicing so many skills. So some people do that. You build them onto an end of a phonics lesson, they're available, you can build them there. Some people put them at the end of a phonics lesson as a kind of separate lesson, and it might be for a shared reading input, or it might be for some guided reading that's kind of woven in, and we'll get to that a bit more in a minute. So target practice readers are available as print books, and also they are ebooks within the online subscription. The ebook versions include audio and comprehension quizzes that feed through to the reporting area of your online platform. So that's really useful for, you can do those quizzes by putting the book up on your interactive whiteboard as a whole class activity and doing the quizzes or listening to the audio. But also, for example, if you have children with English as a new or additional language, if you're able to put them on a device with a headset, they can enjoy the story that way. Or if you have devices and you can access the ebooks in class, then children can be accessing comprehension quizzes, perhaps with a bit of adult, support generally to check people are able to, manage the tech while they're still young. And of course for home, because the ebooks can be assigned to children for home, you can therefore use them for home readers in that way, because a lot of schools, a lot of parents, they quite like ebooks now. I'm very traditional. I'm one for all the print books, but certainly there are schools where there are issues with, again, you might not be able to afford loads of books to be sent in home in book bags, or you might have had huge problems with books always getting lost with a particular child. So an ebook is a better suggestion. So it's just so useful to have this kind of different formats available that you can use. It again makes it really flexible for how you use the reading books. Okay, so let's move on quickly then to when should we use them? So in individual, one-to-one, group guided, shared, whole class, like how are people using these books? And it is your choice. Target practice readers can be used for the individual reading, so the one-to-one reading, the book bag reading, where you have it in their book bag, they're reading it at home, they're also being heard in school one-to-one as much as you can possibly manage it. They can be used for group guided reading, absolutely, sort of in a traditional sense, and we'll explore it a bit more in a minute. And then a bit more of a more recent model of reading as a shared whole class or half class reading session. So we don't have to jump straight from group guided being 4 to 6 children up to trying to read with 30 children. You might have the logistics where it's more manageable for you, or it's possible for you to split your class, for example, with your teaching assistant, and you might do reading with half the class. But we're busting out the myths and busting away from the traditional group guided reading if the traditional group guided reading is challenging in your school. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. I would suggest, and I know a lot of people like to have a formula, a structure, a routine, but I would suggest thinking about combinations. Why do we have to pick one way or the other way? Why can't we have a combination of using these books across different reading purposes, because they're so useful? So you can have any combination of the above types of reading. It absolutely does not matter a jot if you've been using target practice readers for book bag, sending them home, and then you use the same book that somebody's already read in group guided. Great, they've got a head start. They're going to be able to give more input to that session. It doesn't matter. Books, when books are lovely books, and these are really lovely books, it's okay to come across them again. There's a difference, well, rereading. And again, I come onto this a bit more in a minute, but rereading a book is great for a bit of building up your fluency, building up your confidence. So that's a good reread. Rereading a book again, where you reread it over and over and over and over until you are bored to sobs with it and you know it off by heart, unless you're choosing to read it that much because you love it so much. But rereading to that extent is too much. But this is common sense, isn't it? We're not gonna do the book until we're absolutely bored with it. But there's nothing wrong with rereading in the sense of, I read it in my book bag book, and then actually Miss or Sir used that book for a group guided session, and then another time we used it as the whole class. Absolutely fine, absolutely great. So again, a reminder, target practice reading books are books for teaching. They're really useful for us to teach the application of reading skills. We're teaching you the phonics, we're teaching you the reading skills, and this is our tool for doing so and our tool for practicing. So let's think about individual one-to-one book bag reading. In theory, each week that you teach 2 new letter sounds and a new book or 2 becomes decodable, you should be able to allocate that book to children for home reading or one-to-one reading. So imagine you get to Friday, you've taught your new sounds during the week, perfect, that book could go in the book bag and go home, and children are able to practice. Literally, you've just taught them it, then they can go and practice it. So that's a really good theory. And for many children, that works beautifully. However, the reality is not all children progress at the same rate. They don't crack blending at the same rate, especially early in the reception year. You can have children who they pick everything up so incredibly quickly. They crack blending within the first couple of weeks. They're picking up the letter sounds. So that direct, immediate application works great for them. They take home the book. They're so excited to read and practice, link to what you've just taught them. Lovely. But then you can have children who, in reception, they're really good at remembering the letter sounds. They pick up the letter sounds, but they do not crack blending for several weeks. You can have reception children get to Christmas, so that's 12 weeks of you teaching them, and they still haven't quite cracked blending. So if they were taking home the new book every single week as you taught it, that progression would be too fast for them, unless they have an extremely supportive or able parent or carer at home who can support to crack that blending with them using those books. So actually, a lot of children, especially in reception, for them, it might be better to lag the books behind a little bit. So using target practice readers at the point of recommendation on the planning means direct application of phonics and reading skills. So that's great. But they've only just learned that bit, so they might still require adult support. So you need to think about, if we use those books immediately in school, they've got the teaching staff, they've got your teaching assistants, your teachers, you know what you're doing, you are directly supporting them to transfer those skills and apply it in the book. If you're popping the book in the book bag to go home, you have to think a little bit more carefully about is it going to be a bit beyond them because we've only just taught it? It's fresh. It's so fresh learning. They need some more support before they're ready for that. So, bit controversial, but in recent years, and I do feel like we are, thank goodness, coming away from this a bit now. So this is why it's always good to stick to the common sense path and not get too swayed by trends in education. But in recent years, there were some messages swimming around, a bit controversially, about the idea that home reading should be fully independent. Now, the reason for these messages, partly it was the idea of that direct application, which is a great theory. We teach it, how brilliant to be able to immediately apply that in a reading book. Love that. Great theory, not the reality. But also, it's this idea that we have so many homes where the parents and carers aren't able to support the reader at home in quite the same way that used to happen traditionally. So traditionally, it was just such an expectation. You send that book home in the book bag, it gets read every single night. When I was teaching, in the early days of teaching, we changed the children's one-to-one books every single day. They needed to be changed every day because the children were reading so much at home every single night. They were ready for the next book. It was a really fast turnover. And these days, partly because of the challenges in school, lack of resources, lack of staff, lack of time, we've moved to this model where book bag books tend to get changed once a week to make it a bit more logistic. Partly that's because a lot of schools now don't allow the children to choose the book. The teachers are selecting the book, which, yeah, that's absolutely great that you can select the books for children, but that's going to take more time, isn't it, than just sending a child to go and choose the next book. So we've moved to this model of changing the books once a week. That's okay, because then we say to parents and carers, actually, it's good to reread the book through the week. But I think sometimes that makes, and I speak as a parent, it makes us a bit complacent about, well, we've got the book for the whole week. We don't need to read the same book every single night. We'll read it a couple of times. So instantly less reading happening at home. Swathes of families who can't because English might not be their home language, so they're struggling to support in that way. Families that are just so busy, working, guilty myself, working all the time. So reading doesn't happen as much. So the theory of this message, home reading should be fully independent, makes sense. But what it's led to is that some methods recently in school have been suggesting that you read and reread the reading book enough times in school before sending it home. So you read it with the children in whatever format, shared reading, guided reading, multiple days through the week, so that on Friday you can send it home. And this is taking the pressure off. It takes the pressure off because the children aren't relying on home support to be able to read that book. They can take it home to show their success. Look at this book that I can read. I've been practicing it in school and now I can come in and I can read it to you. And it's a very successful, very pleasant experience. And I think the theory of that's so lovely. And in some cases, it might work and each their own. But I don't agree. I just think that actually, a lot of the recent methods that I've seen of rereading the book so many times in school, we're killing the book. We're killing the love of reading. The children are bored of the book. They can practice the same phonics knowledge. They can practice the exact same application of reading skills to different books. We are in a time and an age where we are so blessed by the huge variety of reading material. These book schemes are brilliant. There's so much there and so much tiny baby steps of progression. You do not need to read that same book over and over and over. Flip that on its head, because you know me, I don't like to be too one way or the other. Actually, often the books are so lovely and great. Yes, there is enough content in that book that you equally don't want to rush through it too quickly and whip onto the next book. It's not a race. There's loads of great things we can explore. So yes, if you're thinking, well, actually, it works. We quite like a model where we might look at a book over several days and we practice different skills on different days. Absolutely fine. Not a problem at all. But I just think we have to we have to really think about what's right for our kids at that point in time. What you do with the children now might be different in 6 weeks' time because your kids have moved on or your situation has changed. So it's just about really engaging with all of these ideas for reading and not becoming too rigid or too fixated on the latest way of doing things. And there'll be balance to be had. So that's a little rant about, rereading the book multiple times and sending it home at the weekend. But you can see where the ideas are coming from. So I personally feel that individual books, the book that goes in the book bag and that hopefully is heard read at school one-to-one, is best allocated individually. This really shows that you've got a level of care and knowledge about each individual learner, bespoke allocation. You've really thought about, in my class, I'm teaching phonics at this particular letter sound or this particular skill or this particular level. But within that, the majority of children are progressing alongside me and it directly links. But actually, I have some children where they can access that in the class with support, but for home where it is a little bit more independent, they need something that there's lags behind, a bit of a lower level. We need to choose. And when you choose that lag behind book, it could be a target practice reader, but one from earlier in the planning, or it could be a Rocket Phonics reader, which contains a batch of sounds that they know, but again, it's a colour level below, it's earlier in the reading. For others, it could be that they're ahead. I often talk about Alice. Alice came to reception and she was super bright and she could already read. I was not prepared and I did not have the resources to be able to teach Alice phonics and literacy separately from the rest of the class. She accessed the phonics and the literacy with the class as a whole. Of course, I tailored it and catered it for her needs. Loads of challenge activities, lots of stretch and challenge and engage as much as I could, but I wasn't prepared to teach different content per se. We did lots of things, like we would talk about alternative spellings at a very early stage. We would throw that in there for her. So her needs were absolutely met. She still did the same phonics lesson as as everybody else, but her book bag book was well ahead. She was, oh my goodness, she was in reception and she was reading books that were easily year 2, year 3 books. And that genuinely was her level. The comprehension was there, the fluency, the intonation and expression, inference and deduction questions. She was a very gifted child. Still did the phonics teaching with all of us. And she loved it. She never was, didn't enjoy it or didn't have her needs met. But her reading was ahead. So individual book bag reading, bespoke for me. That's the way I would do it. Target practice readers are really useful as an intervention support or for learners working at an earlier level, because you can target the letter sounds, can't you? So you can literally look on the cover and go, well, actually, Sammy's been practicing a sound and different spellings, and this book is perfect for that. So you can choose the book that is going to match the needs for intervention and children working at a lower level. Group guided reading. So when we talk about group guided reading, we think about it very much in a traditional sense. So if you've been teaching for a while, it's the traditional group guided reading. If you are newer to teaching, tons of information out there on the web about group guided reading. So essentially, group guided reading is an approach that enables you to devote attention to a small group of children, usually 4 to 6. The number is up to you, at similar reading ability levels. So you group together the kids according to their reading ability, and they work cohesively as a little group and you do some reading with them. Traditionally, you might timetable each group to read once a week. So you might have in your weekly timetable a group guided reading group per day. That's quite common. So you hear one group per day through the week. Or you might have like a morning where you're taking the groups, alternating them around, and you might be taking a group, and also a teaching assistant might be also taking groups. So 2 groups are being heard at the same time, and then you can switch into other groups. Now, again, the group guided reading is something where the theory is brilliant. It's a lovely way of reading. And can you get better than sitting with a group of 4 to 6 children enjoying a book? How fabulous is that? And especially in a time where one-to-one reading, hearing those one-to-one readers, it's really difficult to fit that in. That is a constant challenge to get enough of that in. So group guided reading is like the next best thing, grouping them together and working with them. But I'm always really transparent with everybody. When I was in the classroom, I really struggled with group guided reading. I struggled when I was a new teacher, but I struggled as an experienced teacher with group guided reading. So I find it really difficult to work with a group of children when there are other children in the room, because I have this very deep sense of responsibility for those children, for their safety and their well-being. And it's like when you take your kid to the park and you want them to go off and play independently, but you're just hyper focused on, are they okay? Are they going to fall? Is someone bullying them? What's going on? My brain is really preoccupied with, what is everybody doing? Is everybody else on task? Are they focusing? What are they doing? Why are they talking? Why are they banging their chair? I can't concentrate and give my attention to a group of children if there's other people in the room. It's so hard for me. And that could just be me, but I suspect other people struggle with that as well. Then I also used to really struggle with, so I'm struggling to concentrate, but I'm also struggling with clock watching. So as a teacher, you become a clock watcher. Your day is ruled by the clock, constantly watching for, I need to do 10 more minutes of this, I need to do 20 minutes of this, we've got to stop at 10 to and get ready, we've got playtime at past. You clock watch all the time. So because you're under time pressure and clock watching, and the clock goes so fast, it's tick, 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 oh my goodness, the time is gone. Because of that, I feel like my guided reading sessions were always so rushed, really rushed. I never fully engaged with or really even listened properly, because right, okay, yeah, okay, quick, let's discuss this question. Quick, yep, isn't that interesting? Quick, do you understand the vocabulary? Yep, let me hear you read. Okay, I'll read this bit for you. It just felt so false and fake and rushed. And then, of course, we've had, and I might be different in your school, but I, in many schools, have had the pressure of, you have to fill in your tracking sheet. And because I'm trying to fill in my tracking sheet, I haven't got time to fill in that tracking sheet after the session, and I'll have forgot everything we just did anyway. So I'm trying to fill in my tracking sheet while we're doing the session, which means I'm not listening and I'm not engaging. So I always found group guided reading quite challenging. Now, interestingly, because of that, I push people to think more flexibly about a kind of shared reading, bigger group, whole class version of reading as an option. And I was talking about this more and more, and this started to catch on, and lots of other schools were doing this as well. So people were obviously thinking the same. And I was asked to work with a school. They weren't a rocket phonics school. They were just another school that I was working with on a consultancy in London. And this school was very anxious because they had had somebody come in and say, you shouldn't be doing group guided reading. Everybody's doing shared reading now. We'd like you to see you do shared reading. And the head and the senior leaders of this school were in a bit of a flap because they're saying, well, we've done it like this forever. Group guided reading really works for us. And the person that had gone in had said along the lines of, no, I know that people don't fully concentrate. The other kids are on a holding task. The other kids aren't working effectively. It's not the best. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it sounds like they've listened to me waffle on about my struggles with guided reading, and they're applying it to other schools. And you've got to be bespoke about what works. So anyway, this school had asked me, can you come and observe our reading practices and give us your opinion? I said, yeah, absolutely fine. But from what you've told me before we go and look at your classes, I'm inclined to agree. I tend to say group guided reading is not very effective in some cases, and I struggle with it. So, but let's go and have a look. I said, but I'm going to be really critical. I'm going to be really blunt. I'm going to tell you, let's go and look for, are other children getting on with their task, or is everyone making progress? What's the impact? Are children enjoying reading? And you know what? It was remarkable. It was absolutely brilliant group guided reading practice, clearly in exactly the way that group guided reading is supposed to work. I could not believe the groups of children that were not being supported by an adult for how engaged they were with their independent tasks. They were totally focused. The atmosphere in the rooms was, it was so lovely. It wasn't silent and like really strict and uncomfortable. There was a really low level, natural chat, natural buzz. All of the children, when I went round to different groups, were so keen to show me and chat to me about what they were doing and what they'd learned. I had conversations with teachers and teaching staff. How do you feel? How does it work for you? What about when you have to make notes about? It was such an organized, established system. It was brilliant. So now I really make sure to tell people both sides of it. That for me, I struggled. I quite like a shared read, but I've seen this group guided reading be brilliant. So you've got to look at what's working in your school, and you might have to try different things. And you might do one thing one year. You might say, oh my goodness, I've got a really challenging cohort. The behavior is off the wall. I can't have independent groups working. I'm really struggling with that. So you need to do a more controlled shared read with everybody. Next year could be a different ball game. So next year you change, or halfway through the year when they're more settled, you change. You don't need to have a rigid approach. So group guided reading, the positives, it's more time efficient than hearing one-to-one readers. You're going to get through more children hearing them in a group. And it's a lovely, enjoyable, collaborative experience for children. They can chat to each other about the book. It's book talk. You know, you're really going to get love of reading when you're doing book talk. And once you've got children kind of feeling comfortable and settled with one another in a class and in a group, they really enjoy reading aloud in their little group. It's less daunting than reading to a whole class. But it's quite nice to be able to read to your friends and not just have to read just to the adult all the time. So group guided reading is a lovely thing to do. The negatives, potentially distractions or challenging to focus yourself. And sometimes if you have children that are a bit like that as well, a bit all over the place with their mind, they can sometimes struggle to concentrate. The negative can be really making sure that you've got effective and purposeful activities for the rest of the class. And we do provide some activities that they can do, but I suppose it's about having your class at a point where they're settled and organised enough that they can access things independently. And being careful of paying lip service to ticking boxes and time constraints, and making comments on a tracker for the sake of it, rather than really noticing, ooh, that was a new word, or they really struggled on that, or Bobby needs to practice his fluency, or so it's just being aware of those things. Things I would do differently now. So if I went back into teaching in the classroom right now, I would be more confident to use the same target practice reading book for my different ability groups. So traditionally, where you break your class up into these small groups of 4 to 6 children, they would each have basically a different pack of books according to their reading level, which in some ways is good, but actually I feel like that adds an extra layer of faff. So when you look at the spread of the levels of those books, they'll often be really, really similar. And I think actually we could use the same target practice reader across almost all of those reading groups. You might have a group that's exceptionally ahead and needs something ahead. You might have a group that is an intervention or a struggling group that has something a bit further behind, lags behind a bit easier. But don't automatically assume that you have to have different groups of different books. You can use the same book, but you're going to use that book in slightly different ways. Your questioning will be tweaked to the group's needs. Your discussion about the vocabulary, the participation. So in a slightly weaker group, you might be scaffolding and modelling and guiding more. In a stronger reading group, they're doing more independently themselves. So I would use the same target practice reader. Probably I would use it across all my groups, and I would just differ my support in the group. I absolutely would not keep the books locked away. So when back in the day when I was in the classroom and you did group guided reading books sat in packs of 6, sometimes packs of 8, and they were in plastic wallets and they were in a cupboard locked away. And these books would only see the light of day for the exact session that you're using them for, or a couple of sessions. And you were so precious. And I get it. It's because you don't want to lose a book. You need a pack of 6 and you don't want to lose any. But it was like, nobody dare touch or look at those books until you're using them, and they get packed straight away, lock them in a cupboard, nobody touch them. And I would not do that at all now. I'm sure we can guarantee that we and our kids are not going to lose the books in the classroom. I would have them out and available. So for the period of time that we're using those books, I would have them on the desks, or I would have a setup at the side of my class where I keep books or book packs, and I would maybe have more than just the one that we're using. I might have a few either side of that, and encourage that children might want to, in some child initiated time, oh, we're going to do our own group reading session. Can we borrow the pack of books? Of course you can. Fantastic. Go and play teacher with that pack of books. What a wonderful thing to do. So I wouldn't keep my books locked away in the same way that we used to. Okay, shared reading. So shared reading, it very simply, you're trying to apply the ideas and principles of group guided reading. So it's just sharing a book, developing reading skills, modeling, guiding, bit of listening and observing. It's exactly the same thing, but it's with a larger group, either whole class. So you might put a target practice reader on your interactive whiteboard so everybody can see it from there and you can model from the front. And then you might have your children at desks or on the carpet. Some schools are blessed with a book each, or you might have one book between two. And the children are following along in the book with you and you're guiding them through the book. And you might do things like read to your partner the next page, listen to me, listen to the way I read it, go back and read the sentence again, listen to the fluency, the intonation. What's this word? Let's decode it together. Let's talk about the vocabulary. Well, what do we see going on in the picture? There's so much talk that you can do. And it's the same book talk that you do in group guided, but now you can do it whole class. And you're going to tweak it to make it suitable for that larger group, because obviously there are things that don't work as well or can work better. So the positives is it's really time efficient, especially if you don't have additional teaching staff available. There are so many classrooms now where the teaching assistant no longer exists, or they are pulled to go and do something else, or maybe your teaching assistant is focused on running some intervention and you're left with the bulk of the class. And it's almost like not having staff and having a busy timetable isn't an excuse for not having a reading session. You can just very easily do this reading session with the whole class. If you are working towards having books per pair or books each, and you don't have any books like that at the moment, you can still guide it from the front on your interactive whiteboard. Just put a big version of the book up and have all that talk as well. So it can be really time efficient. You don't have any groups working on filler or unsupported activities and worrying about sort of behavioural, keeping them on task. There's no distractions, and it's not a challenge to focus because it's literally you and the kids direct teaching from the front. You're leading them through this session. The negatives, ideally, you need one book per pair of children. That's the most effective way, is that they are literally able to hold the books, turn the pages, point to things, point their finger underneath, read with their partner. Children do need a bit of training to ensure effective participation. So obviously with group guided, it's easier to keep 6 children on track and focused and in the conversation. If you've got a whole class, there's the risk of children chit-chatting or children enjoying the book and then they read and look at pages that you weren't ready for them to look at yet. So for example, you might build in at the beginning of the session, okay, guys, we're going to have our shared reading session now. Everyone on the carpet, get your books ready. You've got 1 minute to get yourself settled and you can have a look with your partner through that book. So you're giving them the time to get that out of their system, have a flick through the book, have a look at the cover and the blurb and be ready, because when we start, we're going to start with what's our prediction? What do we think the book might be about? So you can give them some settling. You might give them some training in book handling. You might have to be quite firm on, these books are very precious, they're very valuable. We do not want to damage these books. How do we hold them? How do we turn the pages? We never, take from somebody's hands. Obviously depend on the age of the child, but you might want some training of that. You might want some training in to start and end a session, collecting in and handing out the books. So do you have a child that has the responsibility for handing out the books, but they don't hand out the books until everybody is sat and ready? Or do children go and retrieve 1 book per pair from a box and then they sit down together with that book? You might need some training in stuff like when not to interrupt, like if someone's speaking or reading, and when they can call out and participate and join in a very natural way. And a lot of that stuff just fits into your general classroom management anyway and settling your class. But I'm acknowledging when you're doing reading with a big group of children, there's that risk, isn't there, of needing to manage behaviours. And potentially, admittedly, it could be less effective if the ability range is very wide. But I'm one that tends to feel that when you teach children in a mixed ability group, I feel like it's not difficult at all to cater for throwing out there some stretch and challenge. And actually, for children that are weaker, it really can help to pull them up and pull them along. And they might be weaker at decoding, but they might be really brilliant at interpreting pictures and reading a book in that sense, or answering questions. Or they might be fantastic at decoding, but they really struggle with answering the questions, the comprehension. So it's useful to have lots of children kind of feeding into that, or the fluency, or whatever skills. So that requires thinking about, but I personally like that kind of teaching in a big mixed ability group, and everybody kind of pulls. You do have to be quite switched on as a teacher. You have to kind of be very aware, and I've got that hyper awareness of how are my children that typically struggle doing. We've been doing this now for 20 minutes. They're absolutely loving it. I want to do it for 10 minutes more. How are my children coping that might typically struggle with that concentration? Am I asking all the right questions, etc.? And I would say if you're doing a session and it's going wrong, or you're just feeling like they're not enjoying it anymore, then stop the session. You don't have to do that session for the full amount of time. You can build up to that gradually. So that's shared reading. So I would encourage combinations of reading provision. You've got your book bag with 1 or 2 books. So you might have a target practice book that focuses on target sounds. You might have a second book that could be the library book, or it could be a book like a Rocket Phonics with a wider range of sounds, or it could be a Galaxy or a Comet Street Kids with sort of, it might have a few topic words in, or some enriched kind of themes going on in that book. Be flexible with that. You might change it weekly, or you might change it more frequently. And I quite like we have a system of changing the books weekly, but for these learners, they read more frequently at home and they progress in a faster way, and they are ready for their book to be changed more frequently. So we do that. We respond to that need. Readers listen to one-to-one in school once a week, once a fortnight. What can you manage? Can you do multiple times a week for vulnerable readers that for one reason or another don't get heard much at home, or they have a lot of absence? Group guided reading groups. Now, if you're going to do a combination of, you do some shared reading sessions and you do a bit of group guided reading sessions, you can take the pressure off yourself of, you don't have to get through each guided group once a week. You could have 2 groups reading to an adult per week, which is maybe 1 group per fortnight, because you're also doing one-to-one. You're also doing shared reading. They also read their piece of text in the Rocket Phonics Pupil Practice booklet. That is reading as well. So your reading provision is built up of all of these different experiences, and they all have their benefits. Shared reading sessions. You could do very short shared reading sessions. Right, everybody, it's the end of the phonics lesson. Pick up your target practice reader. I'm going to put the book on the board, and we're just going to look at the next page. You could look at 1 page, or you could look at 1 skill, or 1 question, or 1 page of reading to your partner. It could be very, very brief, multiple times per week. Or you might put aside 30 to 40 minutes on a Friday, and that is your shared reading session, where you have the whole class 30 to 40 minutes, carpet or chairs, you talking from the front, and you really explore that book together and practice lots of different reading skills. So you have to think about, what time do you have? What adults do you have? What classroom space do you have? What is the range of your children's needs at this point in time? What works best for you personally? How often is each child heard and supported? And that's key. How often are you able, in one form or another, to hear and support and develop each child? So very briefly to finish off then, just to point out to you that for each of the target practice reader books, there is a lesson plan. It's called Teacher Notes. So there is a lesson plan and there's an activity sheet. They are located alongside each book in the online platform. So when you click on an ebook, you have a little button that says view the book or load up the book, and underneath you have Teacher Notes. And this brings up to you 1 side of A4 of a bit of a lesson plan and 1 side of A4 that is an activity sheet. The lesson plans are presented in a clear step-by-step format to enable teachers to confidently deliver the sessions with minimal preparation. We don't need to make things more complicated. If you want to make things more complicated because you enjoy doing that, absolutely fine. So if you want to have a box that's your group guided reading box of resources with mini whiteboards and flashcards in and whatever else, absolutely great, not a problem. But we always go for that. Let's go for the simplest route. If you are a confident, experienced teacher, you're used to teaching reading, you know what the skills are you need to teach, you know your kids, you don't need to follow the plan. The plan is there to help and support for adults who would like that support. They would like to follow the structure. They don't want to have to think about the comprehension questions. They can just read them off the sheet. They don't want to have to think about what to say to the kids before you can read it off the sheet. But if you know what you're doing, it's not designed there to restrict you or to patronize you. It's a supportive tool. So look at them by all means, but if you want to deviate from them, absolutely fine. So the lesson plans have a very simple structure: before reading, during reading, after reading. The before reading section gets the children ready to read. So you establish the session focus. We are going to look at the book. It might be just going to look at the book. We are going to focus on our decoding skills. We are going to focus on what the book's about, what the meaning is and the comprehension. We are going to focus on our fluency, or we are going to focus on using our voices for a bit of intonation. We are going to focus on pausing when it gets to that full stop. We're going to focus on holding a book the right way up and taking turns, whatever is appropriate for them. And there is in the plan a suggestion of what that focus could be. You're going to introduce the book. How you introduce the book is up to you. You can tell them, this is the front cover, this is the blurb, this is what it's called. Or you can say, what do you think this book is going to be about? What is the book called? What does the blurb say? What does the picture have in? You can revise key phonics knowledge. So it's quite a nice way to freshen up on the letter sounds that are going to be in the book. You could do flashcards, or you can just point to them on the back cover or the inside front cover and get them to say them. You might revise or teach common exception words, especially if you have children that you know might struggle on those common exception words. You might just point out, in this book, we're going to have these words. Let's remind ourselves of what they are. Let's say them, practice them again on a whiteboard, on a flashcard, in the book themselves. And you might remind them of a couple of strategies, such as pointing underneath. So if you need to, you point your finger underneath to keep your eyes focused on the words in the sentence, pointing, sounding out if you get stuck, going back and rereading to help you. Now, personally, I don't advocate too much pre-teaching. Some guided reading systems, some people do a very thorough dissection of a book before reading it. So you pull out all the vocab, you check you can pronounce it, you explain what the words mean. The idea being that then when learners read the book, as they read it, they know what those words are going to mean because they were told. But the way that reading works for able readers, mature readers, for us as readers, is we use the cues in the text to help us work out the new words. So if there was a new bit of vocabulary, I don't want to ruin that for them by telling them what it means. I want them to read the sentence, come across the new word, pause. They might be able to work it out. And when it comes to things like new vocabulary, although phonics is absolutely the first strategy for a new word, we want to sound out the words, you need to have the understanding as well, the comprehension, the vocabulary. And we get that from, well, what would make sense in the sentence? Well, what is the picture? What is the story about? Let's reread that sentence and see if we can get that word. And then, so it doesn't mean you have to pause a lot and dissect the book while you're reading it. The natural development of reading skills, once you're up and reading, involves working out the text as you go. That's how reading works. So just get a balance, or think about how much pre-support and pre-teaching you need versus let's work it out as we go along, because they might surprise you. They might know more than you think as you get through that book. And if you talk about things like vocab before the book, it can feel a bit out of context, whereas in the book it's contextualized. So consider that. Okay, during reading. In the during reading section, the children practice their reading skills while you observe and support. And that during reading section will look different depending on what your objectives are. What is it you want them to practice right now? What their needs are, what their behaviors are, what type of reading you're doing with them. You can choose, which way it goes. So you might be modeling reading behaviors. You might be doing a lot of modeling and showing and getting them to copy you and repeat and see what you do. You might do reading aloud. It might be them reading aloud to a group or to the class. Amazing if you can build up their confidence to read to a class. Eventually, they need to get there, by year 6, whatever. So it could be read aloud to a class. It could be you read aloud to them. It could be them read to a partner, or it could be them kind of read under their breath to themselves, rather than in their head, so you can keep a little bit of a half an hour, but some reading. Pausing and rereading sentences for fluency. If fluency is your focus right now, it's what they need to develop, do lots of that. Pause, reread, build the fluency. You might be focusing on comprehension. Pause, ask questions, check comprehension. You might be pausing to discuss illustrations, words, characters, plot, language feature, author choices. There are suggestions in the lesson plan, but whatever feels natural, whatever they ask about or you're interested in whilst you're reading the book with them, natural book talk trumps any of these kind of scaffolded support. Remember, loads and loads of praise throughout, and be prepared to go off the plan. If the comprehension questions aren't quite hitting the mark for what you want to talk about, then talk what you want to talk about, because that book talk is so important. And when it's natural and authentic, children pick up on that. They're so intuitive, they'll pick up on that you're enjoying it and you're genuinely getting into the content of the book. So that's your during. And then after, a little bit of time to reflect on their learning. So discussing their responses to the text. What did you think about that? Did you enjoy it? Were there any challenging words or concepts? Asking a few more comprehension questions, check their understanding. And again, they're provided in the lesson plan, or think of your own. You might do a bit of retelling, or predicting what could happen in another episode, or discussing the themes, and then relating the story to their own experiences. Often children are quite keen to tell you about, oh yeah, I went somewhere like that, I did that, I cooked that, I got a cat, like in that story. They're very keen to relate, and that's lovely for them to be able to share that and discuss that with you. And again, offering plenty of praise throughout, and be prepared to go off plan. So the lesson plans, the content of a reading lesson, is a balance of developing their reading skills, practicing and applying what you've been teaching them in phonics, the phonics knowledge and the decoding skill and the comprehension skills, and then the reading skills like the fluency and the intonation and expression and deeper understanding, and balanced with enjoying sharing books together. And at no point should it feel like stressful or onerous. If you're feeling stressed and having to fit it all in, and it's like a juggling act, then something's not quite right in the way that you're mapping it out. And then as a team, you can talk about that and thrash out some good ways. And it might be that you have different models at different ages. When the children are little and group guided reading might be harder, you might do a whole class shared read more. As the children get older into year 2, you might be able to have smaller group guided reading sessions. So what reading looks like doesn't need to look the same across every age group. It can be different, and you should discuss that as a school. And again, it goes back to, very simply, the more reading, the better. Oh, I keep thinking it's going to be the last slide. I'm like, come on, I've done an hour and I'm sure this is the last slide. No, there's just like 2 more, 2 more time. It might even just be 1 more. Activity sheets. Each lesson plan is accompanied by an activity sheet. These help the children practice their reading skills whilst also developing things like writing, fine motor control, creativity, and problem solving. There's things like making puppets for retelling, cutting up sentences and putting them in sentence order, matching labels, writing things, little true and false, little games to play. There's loads and loads of great activities in the activity sheets. And they could be used immediately after the reading session, or kind of part of the reading session, or later at another time, or they could just be put into continuous provision, or they could be used for homework activities. So no prescription from us. They're just there to support and provide you with more tools in your toolkit for helping children engage with reading and practice reading, and a few of those other skills that are linked, such as writing. And that's it. There we go. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, you're very welcome to ask them now. I hope that it's given you some clarity over certainly how the target practice readers were designed and intended to be used, and hopefully a bit more confidence about the fact that we don't stipulate, we give you this flexibility, this encouragement to look at what works for your school, and know that, because I know everyone's like, well, what are other schools doing? Other schools all do different things. I can't even begin to tell you the wide range of the way that schools work and the different things they do. But like I say, the magic answer is as much reading as humanly possible, and trying to be natural and authentic about developing reading skills and love of reading as well, using these great tools to help you. So do pop any questions in the chat. I'll hover for a minute while I close down the slides. When I get off here, I'm going to go and upload for you in the chat box the slides and the couple of documents that I referred to earlier. And I will come back at a later date to check. There we are, stop sharing. I will come back at a later date to check if you've added any questions later. Oh my gosh, you've just seen there are questions. I thought there's no questions, and there it is. Thank you for asking your question. The files are in the Facebook group, in the file section. If you scroll down, they're towards the bottom, but they do say things like target practice reader lists. How many books would you recommend a child has each week, especially if they're a confident reader and can blend well? If they're a confident reader and if they can blend well, they're really flying, they're really up and running. If they are devouring reading, they're loving it, they're really enjoying it. Alice used to have, honestly, I swear to goodness, she used to have 5 books a week. She used to change her book every single day that she came into school and had a different book. And she didn't need to do all of these levels of rereading because she understood it all. So it could be 5 days a week, whatever you can manage. You can send multiple books home. Would you send the guided reading book home at the end of the week too? Absolutely, you can do. Honestly, like whatever your instincts are telling you about what your children need and what they would enjoy, that's the right answer. And of course, balance that with what resources you have in your school. I think most schools now have so many book resources that you don't have to worry about, well, if we give them too many books, we're going to run out. We're going to run out of books. There's so many books that I don't think you're going to run out of books. You'll have plenty for them. Is there a way of downloading all of the target practice planning sheets in one go? That is a really interesting question. And I wish there was, because I was doing some work with the target practice planning sheets recently, looking at them, and I was like, I could really do with these all in one document. I will ask the publisher if that's a possibility. So I don't think there is right now. I think it's literally with each book, but I will ask that. And then Catherine and Rachel both asking, can you share the recording with staff later? Absolutely, you can. You just need to come back to this very same link. It exists in the same place. It doesn't go anywhere. So you can access either through, if you had an email to say, oh, here's the webinar, come to this link, it's that link. Or the other way of finding it is to go to my website, abigailsteeletraining.com, and there'll be a page, a link, a menu at the top that says webinars, and that webinar link, that page takes you to all the webinars, and then you can just click on it like that. The only thing you'll need to do is be signed in the way that you've signed up to it today. So whatever email you use to sign in, do that. And then, you can absolutely watch it with colleagues later on at any point. It doesn't go anywhere. Actually, what I do is I do a webinar a month. Not always for Rocket Phonics. Sometimes it's for like secondary schools. I do a webinar a month is my commitment to everybody for free. And then at the end of the academic year, all of those webinars get downloaded onto YouTube for more visible access. So older ones go onto YouTube, and then this year's ones all go onto this page. So thank you so much for listening and for coming live and for asking questions and saying that it made sense and you resonated and that it was useful. That means a lot to me to get that feedback. There we go. Thanks for listening, guys. See you soon. And let me know on Facebook what you would like future webinars to be about, what would be helpful for you. Okay, I'm going to go and upload the documents. Bye.